Hello, my name is Mark Racine, and in a minute I'll be joined by Brian Marks from the Department of Opportunity Youth as we discuss the 2020-2021 attendance procedures. Our goal for today is to discuss the attendance changes and expectations from the Massachusetts Department of Education, or DESE. We'll learn how this translates into attendance in Aspen and how we're going to be tracking attendance in Aspen this year. And then we'll understand the differences between elementary and secondary attendance, along with an overview of the DNR, or did not report process. From there, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to talk about Panorama and how Panorama is used for attendance interventions. Then we'll understand best practices for attendance taking and monitoring this year, including supports from the supervisors of attendance. And then we'll discuss special circumstances such as leaves of absences or home and hospital instruction that you may run into as a classroom teacher. I'm going to start with the 2021 DESE attendance expectations, and I've linked to their expectations in this video as well down below. But to summarize it, is that DESE will be now tracking remote absent and present in addition to in-person absent and present. Previously, we just had one attendance code if you are absent or present. Now that we have students who are going to be attending in person as well as at home, we do need to track that information separately. Every student must have a daily attendance code. So when we closed in March for COVID, the attendance expectations were left up to districts to decide, and we recognized that not all students were receiving instruction every day. Now, as DESE resumes attendance practices from previous years, we do know that every student has to have a daily attendance code each day, even though we know that attendance will look a little different depending on if a student is in person or at home, and whether or not that remote instruction is synchronous or asynchronous. DESE has stated that a student must be at a school-related activity, or receiving academic instruction for at least half of the school day to be counted as present. So this is an increased expectation from the spring, where a student must be present, either remotely or in person, for at least half of the day or half of the expected academic instruction in order to be counted as present for that day. And then I move myself out of the way here. For the 2021 school year, the structured learning time requirements are also restored so that a student has to have 5 hours of academic instruction at the elementary level and 5.5 at the secondary level. Now, recognizing that this will look differently with asynchronous and synchronous, I want to turn over now to talk a little bit about how do we determine all of those expectations and whether or not a student was present when we have a hybrid of synchronous and asynchronous or independent activities. So we know that remote attendance has to be taken daily for students, regardless of whether or not their instruction is asynchronous, independent, or whether or not they're logged into a Zoom session with you. DESE has recommended that schools have a way of monitoring student engagement through the day to confirm that he or she is participating in at least half of the scheduled structured learning time activities. Now, this does not mean that you have to check in with a student and stay on a Zoom session for 5 hours a day. What this means is that you need to find a different way of checking in with a student each day to determine whether or not they are participating in your instruction or your independent activities. So these are some examples that DESE has given. So check-ins during block during the day, completion of lessons or activities assigned through an LMS, submissions of assignments, completion of activity logs. It's really up to you to determine how you're going to track whether or not a student has participated in your instruction during those asynchronous times. You may also find a circumstance where you have marked a student absent for the day, but the parent or guardian may contact you and says that no, they were in fact participating in activities. If that is the case, and the parent does attest that the student is participating in independent activities, even though you have not been able to determine that, we do ask that you take their word for it and mark the student as present for the day. But if you don't have any evidence that a student has participated or has engaged in instruction that day, then that is a circumstance where the student would be marked as absent. In order to do this, we need to make some small modifications to Aspen to collect our attendance codes, or our attendance data. So starting on September 21st, all students K-12 will be remote. So we're only going to have 2 attendance codes, A, meaning that they were absent from a remote instruction, and P, meaning that they were present for remote instruction. The default will be P, with the exception of the DNR process, which I'm going to get to in a second. And since everybody is remote present, there is no need to have constructively present or CP anymore. And then the no contact code has also been removed because we're starting the year fresh. We're able to track whether or not a student has had any contact with just using the absence and the presence. So in summary, September 24th, very simple, absent or present, and both of those codes mean remote. Starting in October, when we have our students returning back to buildings, or when we have our first in-person instruction, we're going to add 2 more attendance codes. Obviously, the remote absent and remote present will then have an in-person absence and an in-person present code. Now, the reason we're doing 4 codes and not just using the student schedule, the A or the B, is there may be circumstances where a student is expected to be in person present, but instead they are not able to come into the building and they log in remotely. That's why we're leaving it up to the teachers to determine if a student was absent or present from instruction, both remote or in person. So that's it, absent and present to start. And then once we start with in-person instruction in October, then we'll have remote absent, remote present, and in-person absent, in-person present. Now, let's go into detail on elementary. If you're a secondary or a high school teacher, you don't really follow the typical elementary kind of standalone homeroom. You can just skip forward to the next couple of minutes. I won't mind. Now, the rule of a student has to attend school or attend instruction for more than 50% of the day really is going to be up to the homeroom teacher to determine, because that's the teacher that is with the student for more than 50% of the day. So if you are a homeroom teacher and you are responsible for more than 50% of the instruction, you're going to be taking attendance in the daily attendance tab, otherwise known as homeroom attendance. If you're a specialist, an ESL instructor, or support teacher, you should report class attendance in the class attendance tab according to your schedule. Now, in the spring, with the expectations being that a student has to attend some instruction of the day, it was a little confusing to determine, well, what happens if the ESL instructor sees the teacher but the homeroom, or sees the student but the homeroom teacher never does? Well, if I were to break this down into a graphic, the homeroom teacher, being responsible for more than 50% of the day, is going to have more of a view of whether or not that student was attending instruction during the day. So that's why the homeroom teacher will be taking daily attendance in the daily code. And the specialist teacher, if you are only taking attendance for a single class, would not overwrite or change that from an absence to a present or vice versa. So essentially, the homeroom teacher is responsible for taking homeroom attendance, and that is going to be the code that is used for reporting to DESE. Moving on to secondary or high school attendance, and again, if you're an elementary teacher and this isn't applicable to you, then just skip over the next couple of minutes. Secondary attendance should be recorded in the class attendance tab, similar to how you used to do it. Aspen is not going to calculate a daily code based on class attendance as we did in the spring closure. In the spring, when the expectation was just that a student had to attend one class during the day, we're able to look for one present code, and then that would mark the student as present for the day, for their daily attendance. Now, with it being a little bit of an increase in expectations, we're unable to make that calculation because it does depend on whether or not a student attended the whole gamut of their classes for the day. Class attendance should be taken on the days that your class is scheduled in Aspen. I think that seems pretty obvious. Now, if your Aspen schedule is not accurate, we just expect that your class attendance is taken on the days that you are scheduled to teach. If you are taking asynchronous instruction, or if you have a day in your schedule where the students are working independently, we still ask that class attendance be taken on that day. Class attendance, and just to clarify, class attendance is not reported to DESE. It's only the daily attendance code that is used for state reporting. So just to clarify what secondary attendance is going to be like, is there will be a daily attendance code taken for each student during the day. Now, in some schools, that might be a standalone homeroom period. In some schools, that might be period 1 or period 2. But there may be modifications that are made if the attendance officers at your school or the attendance managers determine that a student was unable to attend at least half of their instruction for the day. Now, if you have any specific questions around your expectations for class or daily, we recommend speaking with your school's administration. Every high school and every middle school takes attendance slightly differently, and so you may find that it's easier to speak with your school's administration if there is clarity on the specific practices in your school. And then our office in technology, as well as the Department of Opportunity Youth, will be there to help out with any special circumstances or any clarifications that may arise. Now, the did not report process, or we call it the DNR process here in Boston, is very important every year, but this year it is especially important because we have such a short amount of time. It's very important that schools reach out to students very, very quickly, early and often, to ensure that they report to school before October 1st. October 1st, aside from being the 8th day of school, is also the day that we have to report our enrollment to DESE, and that number is what's used for our foundational budget. So it is extremely important that we know who is in school, and we have strong outreach in the first few days of school, so that we can report an accurate picture of our enrollment to DESE this year. Same protocols as previous years. Students will be recorded as absent on the first day of school. I'm going to show you what this looks like. And then as a student is recorded as present, the student's enrollment will be started, and that will mean that we know that the student has positively attended at least one day of school, and they'll be marked as default present moving forward. So how does that look? Well, if you've been in Boston for the last few years, then you're already familiar with what this looks like in Aspen. On the first day of school, every student will be marked absent, and you'll go in there and mark the students that are present for the first day. On day 2, if you've marked a student as present, they're going to start day 2 defaulted as present, and then the other 2 students, or the other students that were absent the previous day, will stay forward, or will move forward as being absent. If on that second day you mark 2 more students, or a third student is present and the first student is still present, then on the third day, you're going to see that that third student has started present, and your first 3 students will be present for the day. And that last student on the list who has been absent every single day will just continue to stay as marked absent until they are dropped from the rosters. If at any time you make a mistake, it's very easy to correct that mistake. You're just going to go back to the day that you made the mistake, mark a student as absent or present, or maybe your attendance manager might do that for you, and the system will catch up and realize that a student has been either started or incorrectly started. So with that stated, I'm going to move it over to Brian Marks, who's going to talk about our overarching focus, as well as some of our restorative justice and restorative practices for attendance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Marks, and I will be reviewing our attendance best practices, specific circumstances, and attendance prevention and intervention activities. First off, let's start with our overarching focus as we reopen schools for the 2021 school year. Our number 1 goal is to do no harm. We're focused on equitable learning recovery. Student safety and well-being is of the utmost importance. We're also focused on equity in practices. As it relates to attendance, we all recognize that this is a challenging time for many families. Engagement, support, and strategies to overcome barriers will be critical to ensure we can maximize participation among all students, especially those among our most marginalized and vulnerable. As it relates to prevention and intervention, all schools will use the Panorama Student Success Platform in school year 2021, including the Support Notes feature, to document prevention and intervention strategies as well as monitor student progress. Schools will still be required to submit their truancy prevention plan. The Truancy Prevention Plan form is due by October 16th. Important to this year's Truancy Prevention Plan form are specific strategies that the school will conduct as it relates to increasing participation and engagement among all students in the hybrid and remote learning models. Each school will be assigned a field-based supervisor of attendance, or field SOA. The specific field SOA school assignments are linked in the district reopening attendance protocol. It is important to differentiate the use of Aspen versus Panorama. Aspen, the student information system, will remain the system of record. Aspen will be used to input daily student attendance, house master student schedules and courses, enter course grades, house individual teacher schedules, take teacher attendance, and to recommend to Suffolk County Juvenile Court and record documentation for the attendance intervention plan. Panorama Student Success will be used for student outcomes monitoring. This includes displaying student data, housing student success plans, documenting prevention and intervention activities, and assigning team members for communication and collaboration. Panorama helps to track information in one place, including assessments from Illuminate. New this year, BPS school staff will enter all student supports in Panorama. This includes using the Support Notes feature, which is typically for Tier 1 actions, and it is generally equivalent to the Aspen Journal feature. Moving forward, Support Notes in Panorama will replace Aspen Journal entries. In addition, student success plans, including Tier 2 and Tier 3 plans, will be entered using Panorama. Supervisors of attendance will ensure that any compliance-related attendance intervention plans should also be entered to Aspen. That is, if a case moves towards court, the SOA is responsible for copying data from Panorama into Aspen. OIT and ODA will work towards a long-term solution to simplify this work stream. As it relates to the Suffolk County Juvenile Court or Truancy Court, court is open, so recommending families for truancy court will be an option at some point. However, we'll want to give families the opportunity to adjust to the reopening model while focusing on engagement and helping families overcome barriers in the early stages of reopening. DESE set the expectation that daily attendance is required, but we'll want to help families adjust and overcome challenges as our first priority. The court process will be facilitated by the Court-Based Supervisor of Attendance, or Court SOA. As it relates to the Home and Hospital Instruction Program, as Mark previously mentioned, there will be no CP Constructively Present Attendance Code this year. Students in the Home and Hospital Instruction Program will be considered present and should be marked P present for the purposes of taking attendance. A physician statement will still be required. Schools are encouraged to let students in the Home and Hospital Instruction Program participate in their school classroom remote learning whenever possible and appropriate. This is in addition to being assigned a tutor. For leaves of absence, eligible programs are those that would traditionally be pursued irrespective of the circumstances surrounding the district reopening plan during the COVID-19 pandemic. Programs that would traditionally be allowable and schools may approve include specialized programs of study, such as a unique educational opportunity that affords the student an experience that is genuinely distinctive or specialized in its discipline, the pursuit of which is unrelated to the current COVID-19 circumstances, as well as study abroad programs, parent or guardian sabbaticals, or non-local programs that have a travel requirement. Additional compliance guidelines are outlined in the district reopening attendance protocol. Programs that would not traditionally be allowable and should not be approved by schools include enrollment in non-BPS online schools, enrollment in a local non-BPS school, enrollment in a traditional non-BPS school, participation in independent pod learning if the student will disenroll from BPS and does not participate in hybrid or remote learning with their assigned school, homeschooling if the student will disenroll from BPS and does not participate in hybrid or remote learning with their assigned school. In addition, we've outlined best practices so that all schools can reopen strong. This includes communicating expectations and reporting processes, clear communication of available resources and support, creating opportunities for families to connect and support each other, conducting frequent check-ins with all students and families, establishing a dedicated attendance team in addition to the student success team to monitor student participation, creating a school-wide attendance culture by setting school-wide and class-based attendance goals, providing student and family-centered workshops, highlighting attendance successes with the school community, and integrating progress updates, encouragement, and messaging at every student and family communication opportunity. Soon we will introduce the tiered attendance system. This will be a service from the central office rather than a compliance directive. It is designed to help schools identify gaps in their attendance practices and then provide tools and resources to strengthen those areas. The tiered attendance system complements the Panorama Student Success platform that all schools will use in school year 2021. The tiered attendance system is focused on improving school-wide attendance practices, whereas the Panorama platform focuses on individual student success planning. In this model, schools will complete an attendance needs assessment followed by a school consult where specific tools and resources aligned with the best practice indicators on the assessment where a school might have gaps are provided so that a school can move to the implementation phase, focused on building strong Tier 1 foundational practices that are consistent in practice across all school staff. This will allow schools to continue to refine their strategies as they strengthen their Tier 2 and Tier 3 attendance intervention activities. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. We thank all of our school staff for the hard work that they do to support our students and families, and let's reopen strong with excellent attendance practices in school year 2021. Thank you.